Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for another 30-minute skills. For those here for the first time, welcome. These monthly lessons are a quick and efficient way to hone your reporting skills and build on your First Amendment knowledge. But they're also more than that. As those who join us every month already know, these lessons are a way for you to reconnect with a community of journalists, researchers, attorneys, and academics. To everyone, please use the chat to introduce yourself, showcase your own work, and connect with others. Also, make sure you register for our upcoming lessons on immigration reporting, how to start your own podcast, and how to create a nonprofit newsroom, among many other classes. Registration links in all previous lessons can be found at nefac.org/30-minute skills. Today's presentation is about protecting sources and documents using the Signal app. It's supported in part by the estate of Gloria L. Negri. Gloria was a trailblazing journalist at the Boston Globe for more than 50 years. This program is part of her legacy of newsroom education and her lifelong commitment to local journalism. You can learn more about Gloria and other NEFAC supporters at nefac.org/supporters. During today's presentation, I again encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and share your own experiences and resources. You can also use the chat or the Q&A button to ask questions of our instructors, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get started. Davis, Abigail, all yours.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's our pleasure to be here today. And may I say that your upcoming sessions sound amazing. So I, for one, will stay tuned and see what I can sign up for. So thank you again for being here. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you all here today for how to use Signal to protect documents and sources. My name is Erin Anderson. I am a senior digital security trainer at Freedom of the Press Foundation. We go by FPF for short. FPF is a nonprofit organization seeking to defend press freedom for the next generation by developing and maintaining security-forward technology, tracking press freedom in the United States, and advocating for the rights of a free press, and by providing digital security training to journalists and filmmakers working independently or within newsrooms. So that is my one sentence about FPF. I'm joined today by my colleague, Abigail. If you'd like to say hi, Abigail.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abigail. I'm the program manager for the digital security team that Davis and I are on at FPF, and I'm happy to be here today. And we are just going to get right into it. So today's agenda, we're going to go over the difference between encrypted and unencrypted communications. Davis and I are both going to talk about why we love Signal so much and why you should too. And then Davis is going to go through some Signal settings for optimal security with you. We're going to start with how do our messages travel. So typically we start with a sender messaging a receiver. That's all pretty standard. Let's say this is just a regular email or SMS text message, which are the two most common unencrypted communication methods. When messages are unencrypted, that means everybody in between you and the recipient can see the contents of the messages. That includes your internet service provider and the recipient's internet service provider, and the service provider for the communication platform that you're using. So that's Google or Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, or Apple. And not only that, but if you're worried about an adversary with surveillance technology like the police or the FBI or even some sophisticated hackers, their prying eyes can intercept these messages too. You can think of unencrypted messages like email and SMS texting like a postcard. Even though they're only meant to be delivered to a specific person, there isn't even an envelope concealing all of that data. So the message itself, names, addresses, return address, is exposed along the way to any eyes that may happen upon it. Luckily, most chat providers these days have a little bit more protection and at least provide what we call in-transit encryption. With in-transit encryption, it's much, much harder for an adversary to intercept these messages, and it keeps the internet service provider, you see our cell towers X'd out there, from accessing the contents of your messages. However, even with in-transit encryption, most chat providers can decrypt your conversations. That means Twitter or LinkedIn or Meta can still see the contents of the messages you're sending to someone on their platforms. With end-to-end encrypted platforms like our favorite Signal, which we'll be talking about today, these give the most protection. Not even the service provider can see your messages. That means the folks at Signal couldn't read your messages even if they wanted to. Well, what's the deal with encryption anyway, right? Encryption is this technical term. We've already thrown it out a couple of times, and it can be intimidating for some to wrap their heads around. So I'm going to demystify it for you as much as possible. Here we have the most basic definition of end-to-end encryption. Data, in this case, this means the contents of your messages, appears scrambled and unreadable unless you have the key. One end is the sender of the message and the other end is the receiver, which is why when a message is end-to-end encrypted, only sender and receiver can see the contents of that message. Now, I've mentioned a key, and you may be wondering about that. How keys work in end-to-end encryption is the most advanced part of technically understanding encryption, but the ins and outs of that are a little bit more advanced than we're getting into today. For our purposes, you should know that secure messaging apps like Signal have the key process built in and will securely and automatically lock the message when it's sent and unlock the message when it's received without any extra steps for the sender or receiver. So just like we were saying a minute ago, with end-to-end encryption, the service provider and the telecom companies cannot see the contents of your messages. And even if an adversary were to intercept these messages, which is very difficult, as they travel from sender to receiver, the message contents would appear scrambled and unreadable. Here's an example of what an end-to-end encrypted conversation would look like without that key. Total nonsense. It's all scrambled up, right? However, you can see the names of the users and the timestamps from when the messages were sent, which is what we call metadata. What is metadata? Well, metadata is the data about your data. It's the who, what, when, where, and how. Examples are things like file name, location data, timestamps, and contact details. So computers use metadata to keep track of it and make sure it ends up in the right place. So you actually need it in order for computers to function. Corporations use metadata for market research, machine learning, targeted ads, and product improvement. And lawful adversaries like the police and the FBI may use legal requests to get access to your metadata from these corporations, and they can learn a lot from it. When thinking about how to protect sources, for example, a call record from a call with a source might show that you called them at midnight for 30 minutes from your home address, and they received that call while they were at their home address. That's metadata, very revealing without knowing even what you said. It's important to note that end-to-end encrypted communication tools collect metadata too. One of the reasons we love Signal is because end-to-end encryption, it's not only end-to-end encrypted, but it collects as little metadata as possible about your activity. I'll touch on this in more detail in just a moment. WhatsApp, for example, uses the same end-to-end encrypted technology as Signal, but true to the parent company's name, Meta, they collect a lot of metadata. Here, we see an example of what a sender and receiver see on WhatsApp message and of what Meta can see. While Meta can't see the contents of the message Lucia sent asking their friend to get coffee, they can see the names of the sender and the receiver, the device types involved, location data about where messages were sent from and received, and potentially other details about the WhatsApp accounts of the sender and receiver. Things like email addresses, phone numbers, names, addresses, other contacts in their address books, and usage data for their accounts, potentially even more than that. This is why end-to-end encryption is not the only consideration when determining how secure a tool is. It's also about the trustworthiness of the service provider, like Meta, in collecting and handling your metadata. In terms of what we trust for communication in a worst, better, best framework, worst is going to be our unencrypted buddies, email and SMS text messages. Better is going to be WhatsApp and iMessage. Both of these are end-to-end encrypted, but be cautious about the amount of metadata that Meta and Apple are collecting. And best is Signal, which is not only end-to-end encrypted, but also collects as little metadata as possible about your activities and has lots of great other security features we're going to touch on. So Signal really is the best. It's become more and more popular, it's easy to install, and the UI is familiar enough to new users, so generally they take to it quickly, even if they have a lower tech literacy. Why is Signal the best? Well, rather than a big corporate tech company, Signal is developed and maintained by a nonprofit without financial interests, and it is an open source tool, meaning the source code is available to the public as a transparency and fair use measure. And that source code is useful to anyone who may want to audit Signal for security reasons. I mentioned earlier that Signal collects as little metadata about your activity as possible. The only metadata that they collect about you is the phone number used on the account, the date of account creation, and the date of last access to the account. Nothing about who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, or where from, or anything else. And because of that end-to-end encrypted protection, certainly not the contents of what you are talking about. Which means when they get subpoenaed by the government for your data, they don't really have anything substantively useful that they can share. To see more about how Signal complies with government access requests, like subpoenas, you can go to signal.org/bigbrother, where they lay out how they have responded to every government request they've received. They basically all say the same thing. All we can share about this user is the only data that we collect about our users: their phone number, the date of account creation, and the date of last use. Some Signal perks and tips. Usernames are a feature where you can shield your phone number so that you don't have to share it. You can use Signal for group calls, including video and voice. You can use the Notes to Self feature in Signal as an end-to-end encrypted alternative to your note-taking app on your phone. You can take a video or photo or video in the Signal app, and when doing so, it has almost barely any metadata on that photo or video. Those disappearing messages, that disappearing message feature really does disappear, and there's a desktop version. Remember, any tool is only as safe as users make it. End-to-end encryption is all well and good, but if a bad actor can get their hands on your device and go into your Signal app and read your messages, the purpose of it is defeated. Locking down your Signal account is a key to maximizing the protection it has to offer. So when considering how to use Signal as safely as possible when working on investigations with your team and communicating with sources, you want to employ some common sense security communication best practices. First of all, assess the sensitivity of the info you need to communicate, either formally or informally, and guard it accordingly, even on Signal. Some sensitivity tiers that you can helpfully use to frame your thinking are not sensitive, so that's for information that you wouldn't mind being public; privileged, for information that you should keep private to only those who need to know; and confidential, which is the top secret, burn after reading, least eyes as possible on this information. When in group chats, use security best practices as well. So turn off group links so a link to your private group it doesn't end up floating around in the wild. Use admin privileges so not all users have access to edit permissions and add members. Use disappearing messages, which are timers that you can set at intervals to automatically delete the messages in the group. And make sure you can verify who everyone is, which is pretty simple. Also, set norms to keep conversations within the Signal chat and nowhere else. You can do this very explicitly, whether you're communicating with your sources or your colleagues. You can say, and repeat if necessary, let's have a no screenshots and no copy-paste policy for this chat. Now, over to Davis for some Signal security setup tips that will help you be even safer.
Thank you so much, Abigail. It is true, folks. It's time for some tips for actually getting into Signal and making some changes if you want to. Signal out of the box is pretty secure, but there are ways that we can deploy to actually make Signal even more safe and strong for us. So as Abigail mentioned, Signal is a really great tool for maintaining confidentiality. So as long as you can trust the people you're corresponding with, you're good to go. Fortunately, Signal also has a variety of settings you can toggle to make Signal even safer. While there are lots of things you can do to enhance the privacy Signal already offers, today we will endeavor to focus on these 5 settings. So first, we'll cover updating your username. Then we'll talk about hiding your phone number. We'll discuss managing notifications, sending documents and files, and of course, setting disappearing messages. So we're going to go through these step by step, so you can follow along if you'd like to. If this goes a little fast for you and you'd like me to slow down, just raise your hand and we'll make sure that you can set up Signal per your liking if you'd like to follow along. So for journalists especially, it is important to maintain privacy around things like your phone number while still being available to accept tips. This brings us to our first and perhaps most important tip for today. Signal allows you to share a username. This setting was actually updated in 2023 to a lot of celebration from our team and everyone else we know who works in digital security. This new-ish setting means you no longer have to give out your phone number in order to correspond with someone using Signal. Instead, you can set up a username and share that instead. So here's how to set it up. So first, if you have Signal open, I've not shown this for privacy reasons on my own end. You can open the app and then you can find all of your settings by clicking on your icon at the top of your screen. When you do, this is what you may see. So here you can see that you can click your icon again. This will allow you to view settings. So click that D in my case, and it'll open this menu. Here you can see I've already set up a username. It's davisa.25. I've since changed it, which also is a good note. You can change your username as you prefer when you'd like to. If you click that username, then you can see that you can edit it. That is where you go to change your username if you like to. You can do that as you please. And from there, you can know that all usernames will include text followed by a dot and then a number. I've since changed mine to 225 because, fun fact, there are 225 spaces on a Scrabble board. So I highly encourage you to have fun with your username where you can. So once you've done that, you can hide your phone number. You can determine also who will be able to see that you're on Signal unless you message them or have an existing chat with them. So this is a great screen, a great privacy screen that you can deploy if you don't want to be known to be on Signal at any given time, or if you just want to keep your phone number private. They're very hard to change, so I highly recommend that you do. So once again, you can find your settings by clicking on your icon at the top of the screen. You can click your icon to view settings. And then in this field labeled phone number, you can click to see what your settings are currently, and you can set who can see my number to nobody. You can also set who can find me by number to nobody. Another really neat feature from Signal is the ability to receive notifications letting you know that a message is waiting for you without revealing who it's from or what it says. A lot of other apps, you either can see the message or not, and when you do, it's very revealing. But in Signal, you can just get a little notification that says you have a message in Signal, and it always has an exclamation point, which I think might oversell sometimes the contents of the messages themselves, but there you have it. I love this feature in particular because I like to keep my home screen from revealing too much information, but I also do not like to miss messages that are waiting for me. So here's how you set that up. As always, start by clicking on your icon to get the settings. Then you can click notifications. In this menu, you can look at notification content and look at what it is showing. I've already set mine to no name or content. You can click there if you want to adjust it. You can see name and content and actions. You can see name only, or as I prefer, no name and content. Our fourth tip for today is sending documents. As Abigail mentioned, Signal is really great for sending images to people. As with messages themselves, Signal does not attach a bunch of metadata, and it scrubs metadata off of images as you send them as well. This means that no one will know things about the photo, including where it was taken, the make and model of the phone used to take the photo, and so on. So this is a very neat feature. So to click a message to an individual, you're going to click the pen and pencil icon on the upper right of your Signal app and search for your intended recipient. Again, for privacy reasons, I didn't include this step in these slides. I did this using the note to self feature. So once I've gotten myself into the chat I'm looking for, on the very bottom of the screen, you'll find that plus sign. When you click that plus, it'll open up your photos roll. Here you can go to your actual settings menu within your phone to determine how many photos to show. So I try to restrict that as best as possible, just in case my phone happens to fall into the wrong hands when I'm out and about in the world or when I'm traveling. Then finally, I picked this sculpture of a turkey, which I thought was really neat. This is in Pennsylvania when I visited my uncle last summer. And I clicked that upward arrow to send it to myself. So yeah, this was really a fun way to share photos without giving away too much information. Abigail mentioned before that you can use Signal itself to take photos, which is a really nice way to avoid having metadata collected on those photos to begin with. There's other ways that you can send photos. If you take it from your photo roll and click on it, you can send to Signal through that menu on the bottom as well. So there's lots of ways to get photos and other documents into Signal as you need. Now let's talk about disappearing messages. Unless it is necessary for the journalistic process, it's a good idea to set your chats to disappear after a time. This is a great mitigation for those who risk losing their phone, which is all of us, frankly, or having your phone confiscated. There are lots of options here for how long you can keep messages, so let's take a look. In your by now familiar settings menu, you can click privacy. Then you can click disappearing messages here. And then here's all the different lengths of time that you can select. I prefer 1 week for most things. Of course, if you have a data retention policy, you'll need to comply to that. It's also worth noting that when you adjust the setting, it applies to new messages sent and received in new conversations. They will disappear once they've been seen. Please note you can also set disappearing messages per conversation by clicking on the icon of your conversation partner. So you head back into the chat you're having with that person or that group. The first item in the menu for your chat with your conversation partner or partners is the option to set disappearing messages. So if you need to clear messages quickly on certain chats, you can use that option. So I've covered 5 different settings that hopefully will help you in your journalistic process, but there is so much more to Signal than we had time to share today. You can find these tips and more in our guides. The first one I'd like to share with you is called Signal, the Secure Messaging App, a guide for beginners. And if you want to get deeper into the weeds, please see the guide Locking Down Signal. And while I have you, we also issue tips on a weekly basis via our newsletter. So here's a great way that you can follow along with our work as a team. We also let folks know when we'll be at conferences. So if you'd like to meet us in person, please follow here. We also issue notifications through the newsletter if we write a new piece. So you can follow our work through our newsletter. So we're open for questions, but in the meantime, I just want to let you know how to reach us. We are at abigail@freedom.press and at davis@freedom.press. If you want to learn more about Signal, if you'd like to dig into any other digital security concepts, please reach out. We'd love to chat with you. And with that, I'll hand things back over for Q&A.
Thank you, Abigail. Davis, appreciate it. A lot of really good information here. Just real quickly before we wrap up, despite this excellent instruction, there still might be some in the audience that are thinking, this is a little too daunting for me. Maybe
Sure.
I just don't have the tech wherewithal to use this app. Any reassurances for them or any additional guidance you can give to everybody to make them feel confident taking that first step in the process?
There is often a tension between like security and privacy and usability. And the reason that we love Signal so much is that they have somehow managed to thread those two things. So they have a really crack team on their side who are working constantly on usability features in addition to all those really nice, neat security and privacy features that Abigail and I love so much. So unlike some of your like security tips, this is actually sort of a plug and play option where you can absolutely just download Signal, find the people you want to talk to, start your chats. Out of the box, it's nice and secure. These are just ways to enhance your security, which we know journalists often need. Abigail, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that one thing I love about Signal, and I mentioned earlier, I use the short term UI, which means user interface. I think if you've never used Signal before, you will feel very comfortable and familiar as soon as you download it. It looks like any other basic text messaging app, and everything in terms of like where the settings are, how to find other users and look at your contact list, it's all very similar to how any other texting app would work. And in fact, there's less bells and whistles than something like WhatsApp, which has a million buttons everywhere. So you might even find it easier to use than that.
Great, thank you. And one last question before we conclude today. Any suggestions for the journalists in the audience on how they can best encourage their sources to use Signal so they can have the types of encrypted conversations you described?
Yes, definitely. We actually do a whole other session if you're ever interested on securely communicating with sources. And one of the things that we emphasize during that session is that you can't control how a source gets in touch with you, right? So they might send an unencrypted email or message you on Twitter or LinkedIn, right? And I think that one of the best ways to try to make things more secure is actually to try to take control of that conversation and say, thanks so much for reaching out. Can we move this to a more secure platform? Suggest Signal. Be able to like share the link of where they can download Signal if they never have. But if you're sensing like resistance or confusion at all, have a second backup in mind. If you remember, we had that like worst, better, best. Signal's definitely the best. But if they maybe are more familiar with something like WhatsApp or iMessage that's also end-to-end encrypted, you can be aware that they're collecting more metadata, but at least still have that protection on those platforms and maybe be able to move them over there more easily. Davis, do you have anything to add there?
I do. First and foremost, just a nitty-gritty on iMessage. And that is when you're having those blue bubble conversations, that indicates that end-to-end encryption is on and functioning. There is a setting where if you are familiar with a blue bubble conversation, suddenly it tips into green. There's a setting on your iPhone to prevent that from happening. When you're in the green bubble, it indicates it's no longer end-to-end encrypted. So that's just one little finer point there. I also like to think about like providing guidance before the point of contact. So if you have a website, if you have a bio that you use on X or Blue Sky or wherever you are these days, making sure that you're clear on all the places you can be reached and what are the rules that, well, that's putting it harshly. What are the guidelines that you would like to see people follow? So you can say, if you have a secure tip, please reach me at Signal, username, blah, blah, blah. So that's one way you can sort of nudge the conversation in the right direction before folks reach out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. This iMessage feature where you have the blue bubbles or the green bubbles, basically iMessage will convert your message into a regular SMS text if you are sending it to someone who does not use an iPhone and is not on iMessage. So that's why you can still talk to people who are on Android, but that means that if they're not on iMessage and you don't see that blue bubble, like Davis was saying, then that message has been converted and is no longer end-to-end encrypted. And I think that's really, thank you for pointing that out, Davis.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Actually, one more question. We have a number of journalists, and in fact, I get inquiries from journalists, unfortunately, more and more regularly now. Those that are traveling abroad, they're leaving the country. The question for the two of you is for those journalists and others that are using Signal but traveling internationally, would you recommend that they delete the app from the phone entirely, or is there another way to protect all of the information as they are traveling?
That's a
Davis.
really great question. And I want to say that we have a 90-minute training on traveling internationally because it is a fraught issue and there's a lot that you can do to prepare. We try to make it nice and simple and clear for folks. But on the note of Signal, you need a username or you need a phone number to register for Signal. So if you take it off your phone, travel internationally, and you don't have access to that username, you cannot bring Signal back onto your phone. So that's one thing to note. So meanwhile, Signal is a really nice place to turn when you're traveling. You don't want these messages to be, you know, blasting all sorts of metadata around about where you're located and so on and so forth. So my personal take, and I would love to hear from Abigail and from folks in the room and from you, Justin, if you do this as well, is to just go through and look and see, are there sensitive conversations I'm a part of? Is there any, you know, can I back out of these conversations and let the folks know in those groups, hey, I'm traveling, you know, I'm going to step back, but who can I reach to be re-added later on once I'm on safer ground again? And I would also say, because I forgot to do this, write down the groups that you leave, because I left our DST group for 6 weeks unknowingly. And all of a sudden I was like, I haven't heard from my colleagues in Signal in a long time, and that feels weird. And so finally I realized that I had taken the step that I recommend, but I hadn't done the work of making note of that. And so when I came back, I didn't remember to re-add myself or ask to be re-added. So there is a nice balance of like actually working with the devices that you're traveling with, but also some meditation really involved in a lot of like hand note taking. So it's a nice blend of, you know, not using technology and also using technology at the same time. What do you think,
Definitely. I agree with you 100%. I think it really depends on what we would call your risk assessment or your threat model, right? What you're most concerned about. Another consideration here is if you have the option of having a dedicated work device and you can leave your personal device at home, then that is something to consider. I even have a dedicated work Signal number. So the Signal that is on my work device is work only, and I audit it way more frequently than my personal Signal to delete old messages and remove myself from group chats that I don't need to be in. And I keep the contact list even very curated. So there's other considerations besides just deleting the app entirely. Including making sure whatever device you're taking with you has a very strong passcode. You've turned off Face ID so that if someone gets their hands on that device, they can't get into it in the first place. So that's what I would say. I agree with Davis on, and like you can delete it. You can also consider your level of risk and just audit what information is available on the Signal app and make sure that it's as little as possible.
All right, great. Thank you both. We do have a few other questions trickling in, but we are unfortunately out of time. So I would encourage everyone who didn't have their question answered to reach out to Abigail and Davis directly. You have their emails right here on the slides. For those that joined us late and may have missed some information, know that a recording of this presentation will be posted online very shortly. So you'll have access to all of the slides. We'll also provide direct links to all of the resources shared by Abigail and Davis. So with that, that, Davis and Abigail, thank you again so very much for all of this information, this really helpful lesson. Really appreciate all the work that you do here in the scope of Signal, but also more generally, all the work you do at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And many thanks to everyone who joined us today. We provide these lessons as a public service to you, so please return the favor and encourage your colleagues and friends to join us each month. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. On behalf of NEFAC, thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.